Hello, and welcome to the Peer TA podcast. I'm your host, Imani Hutchinson, and a member of the Peer TA team, where we facilitate information sharing across state and local agencies. Here with the Peer TA team, we provide technical assistance, facilitate dialogue, and help program staff learn about effective strategies to support families. This episode is the first in a two-part series to discuss strategies and opportunities to bring individuals with lived experiences into decision-making. Individuals with lived experience can be defined as those who have been directly exposed to or impacted by one or more social issue. For example, specifically for TANF, this is usually people who have experienced poverty at some point in their lives and who have been on TANF or some other assistance program. For TANF agencies, incorporating these voices into decision-making processes and policymaking can be extremely important, both for making the program better and for making people's lives better. In this episode, we'll talk about what agencies should consider before rolling out initiatives to incorporate the voices of people with lived experiences into decision-making. We spoke with Marjorie Sims from the Ascend at Aspen Institute, Teresa Arnold from the Clark County Department of Job and Family Services in Ohio, Chelsea Hall from the Colorado Department of Human Services, and Mary Papp from the Quinault Indian Nation TANF program. We also had our three resident content experts with lived experience, Anthony Barrows from Project Evident, Princess Mag from the Colorado Family Voice Council, and Michelle Noble from Clark County, Ohio. Over the span of several weeks, we had engaging conversations about what operationalizing these strategies look like for staff and how it's impacted the agencies and people with lived experience. What we didn't expect was to be so moved by insights on the delicate balance between respecting and valuing people with lived experiences, both within and beyond the agency walls. But we were, and that compelled us to give this content its own episode. From understanding staff capacity and fostering meaningful relationships with the community to creating a trauma-informed workplace, you'll get a glimpse into the multifaceted and transformative journey of change. So whether you're an agency professional, a decision maker, or simply curious about the power of lived experiences in shaping policies and programs, this episode promises to be an enriching and eye-opening experience. Get ready to be inspired and enlightened by the voices at the forefront of this transformative movement. Starting with our first guest, Marjorie Sims from the Ascend at Aspen Institute.
Hi, I'm Marjorie Sims, and I am Managing Director at Ascend at the Aspen Institute, and I've been on the team 8 years. So Ascend was founded truly with the notion of how do you change the national discourse around why families are poor or low income and what systems and structures may need to change to ensure that all families have opportunities to succeed. Ascend is focused on what we call two-generation or whole family approaches to achieving economic mobility for families, but our true North Star is family prosperity, economic well-being, as well as health and well-being. So all of our work is aiming towards that North Star.
Marjorie brings a host of experience coordinating guidance and technical assistance to people who are intentionally and actively engaged in initiatives that bridge the gap between families and agencies. This is actually closer to home since Anthony Barrows was a fellow with the Ascend at Aspen Institute and Chelsea Hall is a 2Gen coordinator at her Colorado site. The Ascend at Aspen Institute actually provided us with the two guiding principles that underpin the intent of this podcast series. 1, to ensure racial, gender, and economic equality, and 2, to listen to the voices and recommendations of families. To get us started, we talked to Anthony Barrows about why the preparation for incorporating individuals with lived experience into decision-making is just as important as the implementation. We'll let him introduce himself.
So Anthony Barrows, I'm a managing partner at Project Evident, where I'm also the founder of the Center for Behavioral Design and Social Justice. I think when you combine the lived expertise of people who've navigated these programs as beneficiaries with research evidence, you're going to get insights about how to build and run programs that exceeds either one of those in isolation.
The concept itself of involving people who have been directly impacted by a social issue or human service agency is not particularly new. What's novel about where we are and how conversations are proliferating around this is how we do it. We find ourselves, as a field of human service professionals and researchers, thinking about how we share power, how we show up authentically, and how we act on what we hear. Anthony had some specific examples about how our focuses are shifting and why preparation is increasingly important.
We need to prep organizations for this kind of work as much as we prep participants. So typically there's a lot of talk about, okay, how do we bring people with lived experience to the table and help them speak the language of the bureaucrats or the line workers or the decision makers at the commissioner level, or how do we get people ready to speak to elected officials? And that's important. We want people to be able to communicate with each other, and in circumstances where there's lots of jargon and acronyms or different rules of the road in certain circumstances, you want people to know that, and that's good. And what's also true is that if we don't engage in the kind of preparation, whether it's organizational change management or the kind of cultural work that's required to meet constituents where they are and meet them respectfully and ready to listen, then we're not really engaged in a kind of two-way conversation among equals. We're putting people with lived experience in a position of supplication. And I don't think that's right. And frankly, whatever you think of the ethics of it, it's also not using their insight to the most effect if we haven't prepared decision makers and organizations to not just listen to what people have to say, but to act on what they're hearing. That takes any number of forms and it'll change from organization to organization. But my main takeaway is that organizations and the people that run them and work in them need to be ready to invite people in meaningfully to these conversations before they do it, not just to prepare people to enter these spaces and speak the language that the folks in them can hear. So that's number one. Do your prep work. Get yourself ready to have these conversations.
Hopefully, it's becoming apparent to you early on how important voices like Anthony Barrows are. We were also lucky to speak with Princess Mack, who's another expert that lands at the intersection between individuals with lived experiences and professionals who have worked with or in human service agencies like TANF. But Princess Mack did a much better job of introducing herself than I could do here. So here she is doing just that.
My name is Princess Mack. I am part of the Family Voice Council alumni. I bring to the voices of disabled, grandmother of two nonverbal speaking autistic children, two high level need children that are in their teens, and also experiencing being below the FPL level and receiving benefits from the state of Colorado. As far as my participation in developing the Family Voice Council, that came into being by me having volunteer services through the Young Family Child Wellness with Colorado Department of Human Services. Because I had been volunteering for 5 years, had been very participatory, I really leveraged the power dynamic in having a platform for my voice, and really reached out and networked with others in positions of power. When this opportunity became available, I was asked if I would like to help develop the Family Voice Council. I felt honored to do so because it is important to have family voice, community voice in the developing of a program from its inception. So that's where the initial piece started in developing the Family Voice Council.
Even with all of her experience and passion, she's wrestled with what it means to have lived experience for herself, her peers, and her partners. What she said to us next really allowed me to sit with how we're asking people with lived experience to show up and what we expect of them. Here is as good a time as any to reemphasize that we have so much to learn from people with lived experience. But enough from me. Let's get into her thoughts.
I have a love-hate relationship with the term lived experiences. Every person living on this earth has lived experience, regardless of their credentials. Lived experiences don't have a respecter of person in regards to credentials. We bring those with lived experience on board as though they don't have credentialed experience. We don't bother to even probe or ask or have appreciative inquiry into their background or what their pedigree is or any of those accolades. We just assume because they're receiving services, there is no higher form of education that's been received. I feel every policy is a result of someone's lived experience, whether it's positive or negative. To be at the table and to be present, in my opinion, is to remove the credentials, remove the acronyms behind a person's name, and tell me who you are without those credentials. Tell me what voices you represent without those credentials. And then as we start to look at brainstorming and finding opportunities, then you can overlay your credentials as a pathway of a different type of knowledge that you can add to complement lived experience. Not that it's a us and a them. And we don't have lived experience, so we don't share lived experience. And the whole time, some of us don't even know how you're going to get home. You're riding on fumes to work, but you're sitting there and unable to be completely human and understand that plight. And that's where I feel there becomes a level of compassion fatigue. So I have a lot of tension with that lived experience term.
Anthony Barrows talks about the work, function, and experiences of credentialed individuals with lived experience working in human services. As we open up this dialogue, it's critically important to remember that we're discussing credentials in the traditional and non-traditional sense. Credentials can include lived experience itself, like being an expert about your experiences with work, food, or housing insecurity. It could also include academic accolades, like a degree or certificate in related fields. As Princess Mac wrestles with the term and usage of lived experience within her life and work, Anthony Barrows brought this contention to the forefront for us as he described his lived experience and how these nomenclatures can be really significant in organizing spaces, as someone who now works alongside these agencies.
The folks that I'm trying to organize are called intersectional professionals, another coinage of mine. In essence, these are people who have a dual expertise: the visceral lived experience of navigating programs as clients or beneficiaries, combined with the professional acumen of navigating those programs as employees and leaders. I myself identify as an intersectional professional. I basically experienced every public program that you can imagine. So from the time that I was in utero, I was participating in WIC, grew up in public housing, was on what was then AFDC and what is now TANF, got food stamps, which are now called SNAP, was in foster care, the juvenile justice system, went to public schools, federally qualified health centers. I know all of these systems firsthand and have been very lucky through the opportunities that I've gotten in my education and career to be able to go back into those places and exert my expertise, both lived and academic and professional, to try to improve those systems that I know so well so that the folks coming up behind me have a better experience. Unfortunately, though, no one's really put a name on us. And so that's one of the things that I'm hoping to do, is to get some recognition for intersectional professionals out in the workforce and to really figure out a way to more effectively mobilize the expertise we bring to the table.
Throughout this podcast, we balance these two delicate functions of individuals with lived experience. Those, such as Princess Mac with lived experience who work within these agencies, and others, such as Anthony Barrows with lived experiences who work with these agencies from the outside. To give us a third perspective, I'd like to introduce Mary Pat. Mary works at the Quinault Indian Nation's tribal TANF program that regularly considers how to incorporate the perspectives of individuals with lived experiences into programming in a way that humanizes them and evokes empathy and respect for their experiences. The closeness of the TANF staff to their tribal community provides a model for how we can diverge from the traditionally paternalistic nature of human services. This context can help us glean more important insights around the way some Native or Indigenous communities show care and compassion for the families receiving TANF assistance as a result of their shared experiences. Sidebar for listeners: we acknowledge that Native versus Indigenous may be preferable depending on the group, so I use both to be sensitive to that and to be as inclusive as possible.
My name is Mary Papp. I'm the TANF manager. Working with the tribe is a little bit different because a lot of our staff are related to a lot of people that we're getting input from, or they're their neighbors or they're their friends. So it's different. We have different level of relationships with our participants. They are not a number to us. They are our community members. These are people we go to funerals with, we go to baby showers with, We go to community events or paddling or drumming or whatever we're doing. So they're just not a participant to us. So we have that relationship with just about everybody, unless they're just new to the area and they show up and we're not really familiar, but we're really work hard to build that relationship.
As we continued our conversation with Mary Pat, we were surprised to hear again that staff in her agency also have lived experience, and their understanding of the program enhances the vision for the TANF program itself. Listen to what she says.
We didn't have tribal TANF when I was 16 when I had my first child. So I have an understanding. We have a youth advocate who was a young single mother who accessed public assistance. We have another youth advocate, and the majority of these are our tribal members and they're our employees. So I would say 10 of the 18 that we have accessed public assistance in one way or another, whether it's state or whether it's through the tribe itself. So yes, yeah, it's a large amount. I think it helps the staff understand the questions that we're asking, like I said, and the purpose and where we're going with it, because they themselves, we don't never know. Some of our staff might come get services. We have one called diversion services, and you have to be within 300% of poverty level. And some of that, our staff are eligible for that. They understand and they see the importance of the services. And when people are commenting on them, in their mind, they can see where that's going to fit, whether it's going to benefit the community as a whole. I just think it just gives them a deeper understanding because they've accessed our services or the state services, and some of them see what the state has provided and now what us as a tribe can provide, being able to design the program that meets our population. So I think it gives us a real good mixture of where taking the information, where we're going with it, and why we're at.
Even though Mary Pat's entire staff may not have lived experience with TANF programs in particular, I really appreciated how she described them as having an affinity for the dimensions of poverty. By this, I mean that she illustrated that her staff's relationships with their tribe are integral to how their program runs. On a national level, human service agencies should be intentional about understanding how poverty impacts people. Understanding the experiences of people living in poverty requires individuals, organizations, and agencies to take steps to level set with people and communities. This is a serious investment in the people and those communities being served. To truly begin this work, we must first acknowledge that there's a privilege that comes with working in human services that shapes the way staff view, communicate with, and connect to folks in the community. Being 1 to 2 degrees removed from experiencing poverty is a privilege. Leaders in administration should seek out knowledge from individuals with lived experience and set a standard of respect for and partnership with them. Of course, not everyone is living in poverty, and to assume that would be problematic. But for people who aren't living in poverty or those that don't have that experience, there's still a responsibility to uplift the voices of those that do. For staff and partners in this work, not living in poverty and not being in the frontline service delivery, this means thinking more deeply, beyond the immediate, about who's sitting at the table and who's been given a say in leadership. Leading with a thirst and commitment to better understand the communities you work with is fundamental for finding and filling in gaps in service, and a significant aspect of accountability on the part of human service agencies to positively contribute to these communities that have been systemically disenfranchised. We should also acknowledge that there are many reasons agencies are compelled to integrate individuals with lived experiences into decision-making. Across the board, it's important that agencies dedicate sufficient time to develop a plan and decide on the best method for engaging individuals and families. The method and implementation plan will color the experiences of staff, participants, families, and community partners involved. For example, leadership changes from within agencies have profound and nuanced implications on how agencies begin to even think about where and how they'll bring families in. This is exactly what happened for the Colorado Department of Human Services. We're excited to be able to introduce you to Chelsea Hall to share more about this program.
My name is Chelsea Hall, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Director of Family and Community Engagement here at the Colorado Department of Human Services. I also am our 2-generation manager for the state of Colorado, and then I facilitate our Family Voice Council here at the Colorado Department of Human Services. I'll give you an overview of what that entails in just a minute. The council started in September of 2018. At that time, we were under a different administration, an administration that really valued the two-generational approach. And a guiding principle of the two-gen approach is ensuring family voice. And so our executive director at the time had gone through the Ascend at the Aspen Institute Fellowship Program and really took that guiding principle to heart and said that we wanted to create a family voice council here that was department-wide. We wanted a full-time position dedicated to Gen, which is now my position. It has evolved over some time. And that we also wanted to gather funds from across the agency. So we blended and braided 5 different federal funding sources to be able to provide 2 Gen innovation grants to 10 communities across our state. That was a 2-year grant where we pulled together $1 million the first year and $500,000 the second year for communities who were doing really innovative 2-gen work in human services. So that's how Family Voice Council began.
Similarly, agencies are subject to the socio-political narratives that are ascribed to shifts in the economy and workforce. We have Teresa Arnold here, who is a part of the development and implementation of the Comprehensive Case Management Program, or CCMEP, in Clark County, Ohio, which has since sprouted into a suite of initiatives and programs that mitigate crises for individuals with lived experience and encourage feedback.
My name is Teresa Arnold, and I am a supervisor over a youth/young adult program called CCMEP. That's Comprehensive Case Management and Employment Program. CCMEP came about when Ohio really realized that we don't have a future workforce. And the programs, the way that we have been rolling them out over decades, we were not seeing a lot of progress. They were cyclical. Individuals would come in, and when you think about it, a lot of our very policy-driven programs, an individual would come in and we would tell that individual, okay, you only have 24 months of cash assistance left. So in that 24 months, you need to figure out how to support yourself. And that includes establishing childcare, establishing housing, getting a job, getting transportation, and that shuts the individual down. That is extremely overwhelming, and it shuts them down right from the get-go.
Communities themselves also develop their own perceptions of human service agencies that, in many respects, have been the result of generations of experiences. Communal perceptions of human service agencies can thrust agencies into a space where change is required in order to meet their own standards for service provision.
I started back in TANF in 2008. And then so when I would go through this process, I felt it was necessary to get the public input, the community members, because we're a tribe, it's a very select group, and their input is so important because that's who we're here to provide the services. And they're a little bit unique because of the location that we work and the population that we're serving. I just thought when we were doing it to get feedback from them, because we made some changes and they weren't happy of the changes, although they did help. And so I felt after that it was important to get their input or buy-in, look at ways we could expand as other opportunities came up. I'm really big on what our program wants to be known for, seen for, and celebrated for. I'm also big on staff providing active and above active casework, which means that I don't want the staff to be providing minimal services. I want them to be doing active and above active. So when we're doing surveys and stuff like that, we ask very specific questions because we want to know, we want feedback. Like one of the questions, what is the team doing right for you? Because we want to know. And they're really good at telling us if we're doing it right, what we're doing right. And then we ask them, what do we need to improve upon? And they're really good at telling us what we need to improve upon.
To effectively adapt agency goals and procedures for engaging families, it's crucial to develop a realistic mental model. This means assessing the agency's current capacity to involve individuals with lived experience. Assessing agency capacity involves being intentional about illuminating aspects of programs and agencies that do and don't have the infrastructure and integrity to withstand critique from internal and external individuals with lived experience. Internal power dynamics should recognize the capacity for staff, both those working for and those who have used the agency's services, to openly discuss their experiences. External power dynamics must acknowledge the present crisis and needs of individuals that are willing to participate in these initiatives, but are unable to for various reasons. This could be anything from childcare to food or housing insecurity, lack of reliable transportation, or basic accommodations. Making steps to alleviate barriers that make it difficult for people to be involved is a great start to building a relationship with the families you serve. Princess Mack really laid it out to us how some agencies in the past may have tokenized individuals with lived experience without making a strategic effort to involve them in decisions within the agency.
For me, being a former employee of the city and county of Denver, being in advocacy with the state human services offers their own unique nuances. However, what I have seen across the board is those in the advocacy arena can be your A1 representatives that you send to conferences, that you give platforms for speaking, but you don't necessarily want to work alongside those same people as your peers, as your coworkers. We have been most affected, the most vulnerable, and we have shared our stories where you haven't had to or have even been asked to relive any of that trauma, and you can again be able to conceal those skeletons in your closet, and yet there is very little consideration given when someone wants to enter into the work arena. Then it goes back to square one of scrutinizing, sometimes even scrutinized harder, because now you have the almost the upper hand of understanding what that trauma is that person experienced.
When you provide opportunities for individuals with lived experience and demonstrate that their participation is valuable, the possibilities for change and co-creation can increase dramatically.
You've got to make this participation meaningful. So just bringing people into a room and asking them what they think, especially if they're not sure that you're going to act on it, not a great practice, right? I don't want to be asked by my elected officials what I think about some piece of legislation if I don't believe that they're going to take what I'm saying seriously. So in the same way, the constituents of a human services agency aren't going to want to share their opinions if they don't think that they'll be taken seriously. So there's a few ways to think about what that looks like. And I think number one, and now putting on a research hat, how do we figure out how to ask people about stuff that matters to them? So there's questions that agencies from the local all the way up through the federal level have to answer. There's administrative data that need to be collected and outcomes that are written into law or policy that need to be analyzed. But there's things that matter to the community that aren't often included in those research questions. So if we can move toward a more participatory action model where research questions are being formed in collaboration with the community, with the affected populations, I think that goes a long way toward making these kinds of engagements meaningful, letting the constituents, letting the community set the agenda, or at least part of it. The other thing in terms of making things meaningful is making sure that you're giving people an opportunity to be helpful. So lots of research and psychology and the behavioral sciences tells us that people want to help. People care about their community. They care about their neighbors. They care about making the world a better place. People want to be of service. And so making sure that you're framing this opportunity as part of being that kind of helper helps put meaning on the participation. It's not that I'm just showing up for some kind of stipend. I'm not doing this so that the organization can say, oh, we asked the community, so now we get to do what we want to do. But in fact, there's meaning behind my participation that can lead to better outcomes for my neighbors and my community.
Another part of assessing agency capacity includes looking into the current data collection processes and how the data is being utilized. Interestingly enough, many community-based organizations, or CBOs, are spearheading innovative ways to obtain important data and use it to inform their services and how they interpret success for their families. We were able to get more insight into the benefits of looking to CBOs when we spoke to Marjorie.
What happens at a community-based organization oftentimes is a direct result of what state systems are doing or funding, and oftentimes information that nonprofit organizations hold, their experiences with programs and funding models really informs what needs to happen at a state level. So for nonprofit organizations, oftentimes it is ways in which they're changing their internal systems to better support families holistically. And one example that I'll give you, and it's one that, I always lift up because they've been really intentional about their work, is Garrett County Community Action Committee. They're located in Western Maryland. They're a community action agency that's been rooted in that community for a long time. But about 12 years ago, they took a deep dive into the outcomes that some of their families were having, and they weren't satisfied with those results. And so they took an internal look and realized that they needed to do a better job ensuring that they could track the family more holistically. So that means understanding if children in their Head Start program had parents that were in their workforce development program, or if someone came to them seeking energy assistance, what other needs might they have? And that is an intentional organizational redesign, right? So that whatever door someone entered into, they were able to have an intake process to understand the goals, opportunities, and needs of not just that person, but that entire family, and they could connect across their organization. But even with all of those changes, they know that oftentimes issues of the benefits cliff or the cliff effect, however it's called in different places, if a family member receives a slight increase in their wages, they can lose significant benefits. That actually sets the family back, right? So that information, engaging with the state agencies to share that, they can work in partnership to understand how to mitigate issues like the cliff effect, or what barriers there may be within policy or regulations that hamper families.
That was a really good example of how CBOs reflect back to government agencies or human service agencies what's happening to families. Human service agencies can use similar practices across other agencies or departments.
So that's at the community level, right? Really engaging, with state systems. But at the state system level, right, they can do something similar. They can align across state agencies or offices to make certain that those community-based providers are facing a seamless experience with those agencies, right? So how do, those agencies have integrated data systems so that they can understand experiences of families, whether or not they're receiving childcare assistance or TANF assistance, or maybe they're involved in their child support programs or other programs. What is that family look like across those different agencies? And that allows much richer information and data for the community-based organizations, and ability for state systems to understand what's working and what's not working for families, not for programs, because we know how programs are designed, but this is about the families and how they're experiencing these programs and policies, and what opportunities we may have to redesign them in a way that's more effective and efficient.
We understand from CBOs in the field that it's crucial to gather situational information about program participants. This helps agencies create services and manage cases effectively. This information is not only useful to the case managers and frontline staff, but it can also eliminate gaps in services and provisions necessary to promote self-sufficiency. Additionally, situational data can lay a solid groundwork for resource mapping, the process of identifying resources available for families that supplement the services families need to manage crisis. The point is that families can be experiencing a host of difficulties that limit their capacity to actively and consistently engage with agency protocols. The solution does not include judging them as unworthy or unserious. Through empathizing with their current circumstances and assessing their available resources, we can work with them and avoid becoming another barrier to their self-sufficiency. Agencies are rightfully shifting from a one-size-fits-all approach, and that effort is impacting lives for the better across the country. We spoke with Michelle Noble, who has experience receiving services at 2 different TANF agencies in Ohio. After receiving services from one agency, Michelle ultimately moved to Clark County, the same office where Teresa Arnold works. The Clark County office has a suite of services that engage and elicit feedback from families and individuals with lived experience. Because of this, Michelle was able to share her experiences with receiving services at both county offices and shares how different these experiences were.
When I came to Clark County, my caseworker, she's amazing. And she told me when we had that first phone call, it was probably a good hour to an hour and a half long phone call, because she introduced me to herself. And I was so shocked because I've never had my caseworker even reach out to me, let alone answer me when I tried to reach out to them. So the fact that they reached out to me, met me where I was, and then also explained everything in a way that I could understand and offered me different types of assistance that I did not know were available, that was extremely important and helpful for me.
Now, as we continue our conversation, let's take a moment to reflect on something truly transformative. The next part of her story may seem small to some, but this is an opportunity to really think about what you're asking of people with lived experience. Michelle will discuss a short story about her son. While we've emphasized relationship building, it's not solely the agency's relationship with the individual that's significant when involving individuals who are often in crisis in these initiatives. This may remind you of the 2-gen approach we spoke about earlier and the burgeoning importance of crisis management for those individuals that include their immediate family, as these may be barriers to their participation. We're reminded, moreover, of just how important the administrative barrier support can be for those families who have different needs than our own that often come to the same agency seeking help.
I felt like she was going to help me with whatever that need was. She was going to help me figure it out, or to offer any kind of a knowledge on things like that. Like even when it came to my son, I explained to her, I feel like my son might have certain type of mental disorders. Where can I go to get him tested or things like that? But she showed me different places that could test him or help me get in contact with them, even called them for me when I couldn't, like if my phone wasn't on, or like just help me with so many different things. So I feel like that was a 180 from where I came from. I was lost, didn't know what to do. And now I'm being explained the process, explained things that I did not know were available, and just truly guided closely through the process.
Efforts to support self-sufficiency are as effective as their ability to connect with the families they serve. How staff, leadership, and administration engage with families has significant implications on their ability and willingness to be involved in decision-making.
I didn't know anything about anything. I was really frustrated during that time because I was living out of a hotel and I was using just like my tax returns to pay until I literally ran out and I had nowhere to go. And I had started a job during this time period. And they said because I made over $900 for a family of 3 a month that I can't receive cash assistance. And so I was receiving food stamps, but I was like, I literally do not have, I'm borrowing money from people. I've run out of money. I'm borrowing money. I cannot pay it back. I don't know what to do. This was also during the time where all of the waiting list for the housing was closed and the pandemic, everything was so hard, but I could not for the life of me. I felt like I just didn't know what to do. I felt so hopeless.
If Michelle had stuck with the first county office, chances are her story might never have reached the agency's ears, and she might have missed out on support for herself and her child because she couldn't build a relationship with her case manager. For those in charge, these efforts help the agency get a full picture of what their participants really need and what they bring to the table. It's not just about quantitative data and numbers. Context is so important. But here's the thing. It's not a one-person job or something you can do in isolation. It's about making a concerted effort to collect all the right information and engaging families throughout the life of a case. Though a case life can feel like just a small aspect of a family's livelihood from an office desk, it is a real turning point and many times a reluctant call for help at a very low point in many families' lives. A part of level setting and understanding participants is mitigating barriers to engaging individuals with lived experiences, and that includes crisis management. Participants should be able to be fully present and not worried about their next meal or how they're going to get home from a council meeting, or whether they'll make it out of the meeting or event in time to get dinner before pantries, grocery shops, or other shops close. Let's shift a bit here and think about what it means to invite people with lived experience into human service agencies. Agencies are more connected to people with lived experience than they may recognize. Staff within these agencies all over the country have lived experience as it pertains to TANF. And having staff with lived experience is a strength and asset to any agency. But how can leadership and administration create a trauma-informed workplace that's conducive to the type of change we want to see through efforts to include individuals with lived experience into decision-making, which would include staff as well? Leadership and administration can and often do benefit from creating trauma-informed workplaces in good faith. We should mention that building a trauma-informed workplace with open communication and room for feedback is a different approach from just imposing trauma-informed practices from the top down without fully considering the needs of those who could benefit from it the most. This is in tandem with changing agency culture to value the experiences of the families they serve and those who've been impacted by the systemic inequities perpetuated by race, class, gender, sexual orientation, among other identities, and not to mention those who have intersecting identities. In many ways, when staff with lived experience are in an agency that's not intentional and explicit in stating the value of lived experiences, many of the fundamental conversations around initiatives to reach the community can be stifled. Important conversations that could be transformative are relegated to affinity groups that have no formal processes for being incorporated into agency goals that would benefit this work.
Folks will be familiar with a lot of the barriers faced by people with lived experience and by intersectional professionals when trying to bring their expertise into this work. There can be indignities associated with having to crack your chest open and tell a personal story in the workplace, or even in a focus group. There are clear obstacles like stereo threat and tokenization where people are flattened out, like their identity becomes that of, oh, you're a former foster youth. Oh, you're a SNAP recipient, where we don't see people in 3D for all of their qualities and experiences, but merely as like a vehicle to understand this one aspect of it. Thinking about from a trauma-informed perspective, from a participatory perspective, how to treat people as holistic human beings that bring a lot to the table beyond their lived experience is super critical, as well as that organizational and cultural stuff around helping prepare people that are the interlocutors within the agency to enter into those conversations and collaborations with a sense of respect and treating people with equality, frankly. I'd say that when we start talking about the subset of folks with lived experience that are intersectional professionals, so the people that are doing day-to-day work inside these agencies, all that stuff is still true. Like stereotype threat can certainly be queued up. And I wrote an opinion piece about bringing lived experience into the workplace where I talk about even things like, having your authority be threatened. I'm a person with a couple decades of experience, sat in positions of formal authority in organizations, and I've had to second guess whether I should reveal an aspect of my lived experience that is relevant to a topic at hand when we're doing some kind of project planning. Because I know that can undermine my authority to the people that are my direct reports if they perceive that or construe it as me being, quote unquote, not objective.
Not being able to speak up and speak out on experiences that pertain directly to the efficiency of the agency and the well-being of families not only stunts growth at the organization, but it can also be detrimental for the families receiving services and the psyche of those in the room with lived experiences. This is why affinity groups bring up some tension when it comes to balancing the role of people with lived experiences and their identities. Affinity groups, by definition, are groups of faculty or staff linked by a common identity, purpose, ideology, or interest. While affinity groups serve a host of purposes for their members, they're not a catch-all to solving issues related to agency culture. Affinity groups offer a valuable space to connect with like-minded colleagues and co-create impactful ideas and solutions. Internal mechanisms for sharing ideas and meaningful stories from these groups can empower staff, especially those with lived experiences. This is just one way to demonstrate respect for the work employees with lived experience do within human service agencies and the value that their lived experience provides to your agency. Princess Mack has had a lot of experience working with agencies who've not been explicit in valuing what their staff with lived experience bring to the table.
Everyone always likes to volunteer and loves the community to participate. Where I find the line, the invisible line or cap, is when it pertains a lot to staff sharing stories. They don't feel that they can share their lived experience unless it's in an affinity group. What? I gotta wait till I get to an affinity group to feel partially safe in sharing my stories. I've gone to conferences where I've seen some employees stand up and share their stories, and their supervisor happens to be in the building, and the tension is palatable. And I always wondered when they left, did they get fired? Did they get reprimanded? Because you could clearly see that it was something, it was an unspoken, that's a no-no. You don't disclose that. And I'm like, so we're in this room being very sterile. You're in this room and you get to opt out because you have a credential and a position. There's a lot of places where I would love a wish list to change those pieces. I am fortunate in the fact that there are some things you have to be willing to sacrifice, which could be some network connections, some opportunities to walk in my truth. I give respect and honor to those who have achieved different credentials, but I also address you as a person, as a human.
When staff with lived experiences or intersectional professionals aren't able to discuss what they're seeing in the families they serve or what they've seen in their own lives, this can create a shallow and compliance-centric dialogue that suppresses the social and emotional dimensions of poverty. This lack of depth can serve as a barrier to really understanding what it takes and what it means to include individuals with lived experience into decision-making.
I always felt tension with in working with Denver Human Services. Sometimes I did not feel like our mission and our vision aligned with what the client needs were, the community needs were. And receiving services and walking in those shoes and then providing services gives a much richer insight to walk through those doors, how some of our clients would experience feeling humiliated to some degree by the questions that were being asked, how the questions were being asked. And I understood those feelings, what that felt like, that degradation. And so the insight that I was bringing to the table is not only from the policy and procedural standpoint of being an employee, but also someone who had received those services. Those people are me. I am those people. And so that brings a different overlay and lens to the empathy as well as understanding what that feels like when you're not quite sure of how to maneuver that labyrinth of services and what your expectations and responsibilities are.
Assessing the barriers and challenges for your staff can illuminate areas for improvement within the culture of your agency. This leads us to the crucial step of evaluating agency culture. Aiming to create a workplace that is sensitive to trauma, this assessment is essential for any efforts involving people with lived experiences in shaping program choices.
Leadership and culture change are fundamental to any kind of change, right? You have to have leaders with a vision that can hold that, inspire people towards that vision, and know when to make hard calls around change. So culture is eat strategy for lunch is the saying, right? And if you don't have the right culture, you're not going to achieve your goals. What we know is that many of our programs and policies are designed in a way that they're about outputs or activities, not outcomes, right? Outcomes are the behavior changes or the advancements that are made. An output is just something that happened, or an activity is just something that happened. So, the example could be you had a program and you served this number of people, right? Maybe, the requirement was you served 100 people. That's the requirement. There's no indication around what actually happened as a result of that training program. What was the outcome? Did people have a greater sense of cohesion after a parenting program? Did people have an increase of wages after specific training? What are those specific outcomes that, are moving people towards, economic mobility or family stability. Most of what's captured in terms of provision of programs or services is the activity, not the outcome. People are not familiar with understanding what a goal that a family has and working with them to achieve that goal along a continuum, despite what the activities might be. And systems leaders are really good at compliance with government regulations. This work is not about compliance. This work is about outcomes. Of course, you have to comply, but you have to have a bigger vision around the outcomes for families. It's about lifting people up and out of poverty. What are the fundamentals of those social movements, and how do you help people tap into why they came to work in the places that they did? Because they wanted to help people. It's not to push paper, it's to help people. And so how do you as a leader help people along a professional development path to tap back into the structures of inequity in our society, and how to redesign systems and structures to expand equity strategies for families and opportunities for families in a way that's more effective and efficient, is about how you change culture, right?
The culture within an agency will have a tactile impact on how decisions are made, what policies and initiatives are implemented, and what the outcomes are. At the basis of this is respecting and cultivating space for people's humanity. And the other aspect is understanding the vicious impacts of poverty and how trauma can show up. Poverty has a multiplicative effect on individuals and communities. Living in poverty creates extremely restrictive mental, emotional, and physical bounds within which people can operate. Poverty dictates opportunities broadly, but more specifically, what people can spend their time on. If agency leadership and staff are serious about inviting families in, they should be seriously considering how they can best use the time they set aside to engage with families and the people with lived experience. As Marjorie mentioned, leadership has a responsibility to include staff in these changes and guide staff through how these changes might impact their work. This makes it imperative that potential triggers for staff with lived experience are considered. The term triggers has sparked various discussions, both positive and negative, beyond the mental health context. But in this context, triggers can reveal harmful aspects of agency culture and policies and serve as a marker for where more time may need to be spent in developing a mental model for culture change. Instead of avoiding them, those involved should seek to co-create mechanisms for constructive conflict resolution that enables honest conversations to address underlying agency issues as they arise. Princess Mac grounds this conversation in the fact that for those who have lived experience, although the services were only one aspect of their life, being scrutinized and constantly making a way through life while living in poverty stays with people.
I know what it felt like to go to one of 5 different intake desks, and you could hear 5 different things from the same question. And so you're left with a sense of loss. So what do I do? And then your benefits get cut off. And then they remember what you told them, but that holds no weight because notes aren't allowed to be typed in the system about their interaction with you. And so the onus falls on the person we're serving for, in fact, not serving him. It's like you have to prove that you deserve these benefits. You have to prove that you turned in this paperwork. You have to prove that all these things are happening, and people's lives are falling apart. People are having birthdays and getting married and having funerals and going to school and having field trips. And the whole time, all this red tape and bureaucracy, which is so unnecessary, it stagnates the progress of trying to be self-sustaining. A lot of people would just rather not work because they have finally understood some portions of how to maneuver through. But if they add a new piece onto that, they don't know what type of fallout will be behind that.
This is not the end of a conversation, but the beginning of involving government agencies in rebuilding communities that have disproportionately suffered at the hands of poverty. There's another big push in the human services field to incorporate more community participatory strategies to engage with people with lived experiences. Anthony Barrows talked us through how human service agencies can really think about what it means to share power with people with lived experience.
Thinking about organizational tactics to change the way that an organization runs before inviting people in is critically important. So everything from the trauma-informed workplace to figuring out how to engage respectfully and on the terms of the community, how to do some of that participatory work. So making sure that we're giving folks power to say, okay, ask your questions that are federally mandated, but also ask these ones that matter to us. Yes, collect data about outcomes like transitions to work or educational attainment, but also why don't you figure out some qualitative strategies to ask us whether we're being treated with respect and dignity or not, because that's what matters to us. Why don't you ask us if we're actually getting enough money or resources to thrive and flourish, not just how the resources are being spent or whether our income is $1 over the threshold and so you can take it away from us, right? Beyond that also, though, accountability-wise, we need to also think about how to close the loop. Folks that are listening to this may have seen the kind of manifesto that Chicago Beyond put out called Why Am I Always Being Researched? And it was a kind of a cry into the wilderness about how especially communities of color and communities of people living on low incomes are constantly research subjects. And one of the things that's really unfortunate about that is that research very infrequently comes back to us. And those researchers very rarely close the loop and say, here's stuff that we learned and why it matters to you and what you can do with it. So figuring out ways to close that research loop, one, by asking community-driven questions at the beginning, two, by keeping people involved in the research process, maybe as enumerators, maybe as analysts when the data comes in to help interpret it. But certainly on the back end, on the dissemination side, here's what we learned and here's what you can do about it. Here's why it matters to you and what actions can be taken to improve circumstances or demand what you need. That last piece, that closing the loop with communities, is a big opportunity for more accountability, along with some of that power sharing stuff that we were just talking about.
As it pertains to intersectional professionals, other strategies must be employed in parallel to create a culture that's safe for honest discussions about what next steps look like.
As a person who was in child welfare professionally for a long time, doing social work, we talked a lot about secondary or vicarious trauma. So when you're exposed to stuff in your day-to-day work, that can be traumatic, but it can be doubly so for people who've also experienced these same traumas. So, you're being traumatized by what you're seeing, but also re-traumatized by having it peel back some layers of stuff that you've been through. And so it's really critical in human services organizations to think about not just giving people trauma-informed tools to interact with their community in ways that reduce, mitigate, or otherwise deal with existing trauma or potential trauma, but also to make sure that the environment that you're working in is trauma-informed so that as a supervisor, you're providing oversight and guidance to your staff in a trauma-informed way. And the way that you think about each other as colleagues and think about career development is trauma-informed too. It is really critically important to think about how we can have trauma-informed workplaces.
It's also important here to remember that poverty encroaches on people's ability to spend time on things. This also applies to intersectional professionals who can be as close as 1 degree removed from the poverty that required them to seek out services in the first place. But if we're thinking about community participatory methods and practices, we also need to include people with lived experience who are doing this work, but not formally employed by the agency. We spoke to Anthony Barrows about what agencies can consider to gain buy-in from intersectional professionals and people with lived experiences who are needed for these initiatives.
I think one of the most important things that we can do is show people respect by paying them a living wage. So there's a living wage calculator that MIT runs. There's other ways that you can figure out like what the living wage is in your locality. Give people that hourly wage that is a family sustaining one for their labor. That's like the number one most important thing that we can do is respect people's time. Because if we don't respect people's time, I can't imagine that they would have us believe that we're respecting anything else that they're saying, right? The other thing to do is to attend to pay parity. So if you do end up pulling people into salaried work, make sure that it's salaried and not hourly. or at least make sure that it's on par with what other people are being paid for similar roles. Don't expect people to take a discount merely because they've got lived experience, right? Like they're professionals too, and they deserve to be treated as such. There's other kind of interesting granular aspects to thinking through along that buffet or that array or spectrum of participation, how to make stuff work for people. So especially when you're doing one-offs, you've got to think about, how best to pay people in a way that works for them. So if I'm bringing people in to do a one-time focus group, maybe cutting them a check isn't going to work. And I need to figure out a way to transfer them their stipend digitally through whatever means work for them. If they need Cash App, fine. If we can use Venmo or something like that, okay. If they prefer a cash card, fine. But it's really up to us if we care about soliciting their feedback and leveraging their expertise to compensate them both at a level that is respectful and in a manner that works for them. And then we also have to think about the externalities associated with them participating. So simply giving people a kind of living wage at an hourly basis for participation may not be enough to make their participation make sense. We've got to account for things like childcare and food. We've got to account for things like lost wages if we're asking them to be with us instead of at their job. We've got to think about the costs of transportation to make sure that participation isn't a net loss for folks or a net stressor for folks. And then to go back to that longer term thinking about helping people develop a career glide path, make sure that we're being proactive about giving people the opportunity to develop skills and identify opportunities that could lead to full-time salaried work with benefits. So are we putting them in a position to join something that could become a line on a resume or a CV? Are we giving people the opportunity to learn skills that are cross-applicable in a paid position elsewhere? Even if we're not offering a full-time position, how are we putting people in a space where they can do some professional development and legitimately claim it when they're seeking work?
It's true that incorporating individuals with lived experience requires very intentional work and buy-in on several fronts. That's why having a strong team of people who understand and empathize with the families you serve is so necessary. I don't know that anyone has ever assumed that incorporating individuals with lived experience into decision-making would be easy. But for those who've done it, it's proved to be a worthwhile effort. For those who haven't, or are just starting, this podcast and our speakers are no stranger to how daunting it can be. As our conversation with Anthony Barrows came to a close, this was something that came up.
So there's pitfalls all the way up and down the hierarchy of any institution that you're in when you try to marshal your lived expertise in your work. And then I think one last thing that I'll say about this, and this is maybe the most pernicious, the hardest to solve challenge here, is that there's often a sense of fatalism. We may be reluctant to talk about our lived experience or to work on issues that we know are important through our lived experience because we don't believe that things will change. And oftentimes that belief is rooted in like years of people saying stuff and nothing changing. So figuring out ways to overcome that fatalism by demonstrating that, yes, your voice can make a difference. Yes, we're listening and acting on what we're hearing. Yes, we want to hear what you're saying and we'll still accord you with respect. That has to be a prerequisite for this kind of work succeeding.
By acknowledging the value of lived experiences and nurturing a culture of belief in the potential for positive change, we open the door to a multitude of benefits for both individuals and society at large. When we recognize that every person's lived experience is unique and valuable, we begin to break down the barriers that have historically marginalized certain voices. Incorporating individuals with lived experiences into decision-making processes, policy development, and problem-solving leads to more inclusive outcomes. As people from different backgrounds and life experiences are actively involved in shaping solutions, the resulting strategies become more comprehensive, relevant, and effective. The collective wisdom gained from diverse perspectives can reveal blind spots, challenge assumptions, and unveil innovative approaches that might have otherwise been overlooked. In the next and last episode of this series, we'll discuss the strategies that agency staff have implemented in their efforts to incorporate individuals with lived experiences into decision-making. Thanks for listening.